A gang of bikers thought they could intimidate a lone royal guard at Windsor Castle. They had no idea he spent 6 years hunting terrorists with the Navy SEALs. The confrontation that followed would become a legend among the palace guards. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, its gothic towers piercing through the fog like silent sentinels. Alexander Alex Drake stood motionless at his post, his scarlet uniform a vibrant splash of color against the castle's weathered walls. Tourist cameras clicked and whirred, capturing images of the stoic guard who seemed as immovable as the centuries-old fortress he protected. But beneath that ceremonial uniform beat the heart of a warrior. Few of the tourists snapping photos knew that before donning the bearskin cap and scarlet tunic, Alex had earned his Trident as a Navy SEAL, conducting classified operations in the world's most dangerous corners. Those skills lay dormant now, but they were never truly forgotten. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The late September morning had started like any other. Groups of visitors wandered the castle grounds, their excited chatter echoing off stone walls that had witnessed 1,000 years of history. American tourists posed for selfies, Japanese tour groups followed guides with tiny flags, and schoolchildren pressed their faces against the iron gates, hoping to make the famous guard crack a smile. Alex maintained his rigid posture, eyes forward, expression neutral. 6 years with the SEALs had taught him patience and situational awareness. Even now, standing perfectly still, he monitored his surroundings with practiced precision. Every movement, every sound, every potential threat, all processed and evaluated without a single twitch of facial muscle. The relative calm shattered when the distinct rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the courtyard. Alex's trained ears picked up the sound of multiple bikes, their aggressive revving a stark contrast to the respectful quiet of the castle grounds. Through his peripheral vision, he caught sight of 5 motorcycles rolling to a stop near the visitors' entrance, their riders clad in leather adorned with patches that marked them as members of the notorious Steel Vipers Motorcycle Club. Tourist heads turned as the bikers dismounted, their heavy boots scraping against centuries-old cobblestones. The group's leader, a massive man with a graying beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, cast a long look at Alex's position. There was something predatory in that gaze, something that made Alex's combat-honed instincts stir to life. "Well, would you look at that?" The leader's voice carried across the courtyard, deliberately loud. "A proper tin soldier." Scattered laughter from his companions followed, harsh and mocking. Alex remained motionless, but his mind was already calculating angles, distances, potential scenarios. Old habits died hard. He noted how the bikers spread out slightly, an unconscious formation that spoke of military experience. These weren't just weekend warriors. At least some of them had service backgrounds, though their current behavior dishonored whatever uniform they might have once worn. A young family hurried past the bikers, the parents pulling their children closer. Other tourists began to drift away, sensing the building tension. Palace security cameras swiveled silently, tracking the potential disturbance, but the response teams would take precious minutes to deploy if things escalated. The biker leader sauntered closer, stopping just short of the restricted area. His leather vest bore patches marking him as Ghost, president of the Steel Vipers London chapter. A small crowd gathered at a safe distance, phones raised to record whatever might unfold. "Hey, soldier boy," Ghost called out, his voice dripping with mock respect. "Don't you ever get tired of playing dress-up?" More laughter from his companions, who had begun to form a loose semicircle. Alex stood unmoved, his discipline absolute. Yet behind that ceremonial facade, his mind was shifting into familiar tactical patterns. He noted the positions of civilians, identified potential improvised weapons, and marked escape routes, all while maintaining the perfect stillness expected of the Queen's Guard. What these bikers couldn't know was that their target had spent years in situations far more dangerous than this. They saw a ceremonial guard, bound by rules and tradition. They didn't see the combat-hardened SEAL who had conducted night raids in hostile territory, the man who had gone through Hell Week twice because he refused to quit the first time when injury struck. The morning mist was beginning to burn away, and with it, the usual tranquility of Windsor Castle's grounds. As Ghost took another step forward, his boots scuffing against the restricted line, Alex remained a statue in scarlet. But beneath that ceremonial uniform, coiled muscles prepared for whatever might come next. The tourists' excited whispers grew louder, their cameras still recording. None of them realized they were about to witness something extraordinary, a moment when ceremony would meet combat experience, and a gang of bikers would learn the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. Ghost circled Alex's position like a shark testing the waters, his heavy boots echoing off the ancient stones. Behind him, his fellow steel vipers spread out further, creating a loose perimeter that any combat veteran would recognize as a tactical formation. The morning sun now pierced through the remaining wisps of mist, casting long shadows across the courtyard. "You know what I heard?" Ghost's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I heard these guards can't move, can't speak, can't do anything unless the castle's under attack." He turned to his companions, spreading his arms wide. "It's all just for show, boys, like those mechanical dolls in a shop window." Alex maintained his stoic pose, but his mind raced through combat scenarios. He'd seen this pattern before, not just in combat zones, but in countless situations where bullies tested boundaries before striking. The biker's body language screamed of impending violence, a language he'd become fluent in during his years with the SEALs. Sarah Chen, a veteran palace guard herself, monitored the situation from her post near the castle entrance. She caught Alex's eye for a split second, a silent communication between professionals. Her hand drifted closer to her radio, ready to call for backup if needed. She'd heard rumors about Alex's special forces background, but had never seen him in action. Few had. A young palace tour guide, Thomas Burke, approached the group cautiously. "Gentlemen, I need to ask you to maintain a respectful distance from the Queen's Guard. It's protocol for everyone's safety." His voice wavered slightly, betraying his nervousness. Ghost turned slowly, fixing Thomas with a predatory stare. "Protocol?" He spat the word like it was poison. "Listen, kid, we're just having a friendly chat with our decorated friend here." His companions chuckled, the sound lacking any real humor. Two of the bikers, Alex had mentally tagged them as Scarface and Bomber based on their distinctive features, began taking photos, deliberately using their camera flashes despite the bright daylight. They were trying to provoke a reaction, a tactic Alex had seen insurgents use to test military checkpoint security. "Hey, Tin Man," Bomber called out, his London accent thick with mockery. "Give us a smile for the camera." Another flash, this one directly in Alex's eyes. The SEAL in him noted how they were trying to compromise his night vision, a trained military tactic. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip huddled closer to their teacher, wide-eyed and uncertain. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, tried to usher them away from the growing tension. One small boy dropped his ice cream cone, the sound of it hitting the cobblestones oddly loud in the tense atmosphere. Ghost's head snapped toward the noise, and Alex saw something dark flash across the biker's face. The man had the hair-trigger reactions of someone accustomed to violence. Another detail filed away in Alex's mental threat assessment. "Look at him," Ghost sneered, turning back to Alex. "Standing there like a statue while we do whatever we want. What kind of man lets himself be turned into a tourist attraction?" He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cool morning air. "I served too, you know, but I never let them turn me into a puppet." That caught Alex's attention. The way Ghost moved, his tactical awareness, it all spoke of military training. But something had clearly turned him bitter, twisted his service into something ugly. In another life, they might have been brothers in arms. Now, they were on opposite sides of an increasingly volatile situation. Sarah Chen's radio crackled softly. Palace security was monitoring the situation through the cameras, but they were holding back, following protocol for dealing with escalating incidents. They'd seen the Steel Vipers patches and were likely running background checks, assessing the threat level. A young couple with a baby stroller tried to slip past the confrontation. One of the bikers, a lean, twitchy man Alex had dubbed Wasp. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Deliberately stepped into their path, forcing them to back away. The baby started crying, its wails echoing off the castle walls. Alex felt his jaw tighten imperceptibly. In his time with the SEALs, he'd sworn to protect the innocent. The uniform might be different now, but that oath remained unchanged. These bikers were deliberately creating an atmosphere of fear, using civilian discomfort as a weapon. Ghost produced a cigarette, lighting it with deliberate slowness. Smoking was prohibited on castle grounds. He knew it. Everyone knew it. It was another calculated provocation, seeing how far he could push before someone pushed back. "You won't last much longer, toy soldier," Ghost said, blowing smoke in Alex's direction. "Everyone breaks eventually. Even the best trained dogs can be made to bark." He turned to his crew, spreading his arms. "What do you say, boys? Should we see what it takes to make a Queen's Guard forget his precious protocol?" The threat hung in the air like the cigarette smoke, potent and toxic. Tourist cameras continued to record, their owners both frightened and fascinated by the unfolding drama. None of them realized they were watching a powder keg, with a highly trained former SEAL standing as the only barrier between order and chaos. Sarah Chen's hand now rested firmly on her radio, her knuckles white with tension. She'd seen that look in Alex's eyes before, a subtle shift that spoke of coiled power ready to be unleashed. The question wasn't if the situation would escalate, but when. Ghost flicked his cigarette directly at Alex's boots, the ember scattering sparks across the polished leather. A collective gasp rose from the watching tourists. The act wasn't just disrespectful. It was a clear challenge, one that crossed the line from harassment to direct provocation. "Still nothing?" Ghost's voice dropped lower, dangerous. "Maybe we need to try harder." He nodded to Scarface, who produced a water bottle from his leather jacket. The seal was broken. The liquid inside wasn't water. Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the radio to the security office. "Potential situation developing at North Gate. Hostile subjects, 5 males, showing signs of escalation." Her tone was professional, but the urgency came through clear. Captain William Harrison, head of Palace Security, watched the feed from his office. He recognized the Steel Viper's patches. They'd had run-ins with the gang before, but something about this felt different, more personal. He pulled up Alex Drake's file on his computer, eyes widening as he read the heavily redacted service record. Back in the courtyard, Bomber and Wasp had begun circling behind Alex's position. It was a standard flanking maneuver, one that spoke of military training gone wrong. The 5th biker, a muscular man with a prosthetic left hand whom Alex had mentally labeled Hook, stood watch by their motorcycles, keeping tourists at bay with his intimidating presence. "You know what really gets me?" Ghost continued, pacing like a caged predator. "Men like you, standing here playing dress-up while real soldiers get forgotten. I lost 3 brothers in Afghanistan." His voice cracked slightly. "Where was the palace then? Where were the fancy uniforms and ceremonies for them?" Alex remained motionless, but the words hit home. He'd lost brothers too, in battles the public would never know about. But he'd chosen to honor their sacrifice through continued service, not bitter revenge. Thomas Burke, the young tour guide, had managed to escort most of the tourists to a safer distance, but he couldn't tear himself away, feeling somehow responsible for the situation. He'd been the one to let the bikers into the castle grounds, despite their aggressive demeanor. Protocol said to deny entry to anyone showing signs of hostility, but Ghost had presented valid tickets and tourist IDs. Scarface unscrewed the bottle cap, the sharp smell of alcohol cutting through the morning air. "Maybe our toy soldier's thirsty," he suggested with a cruel smile. "Standing out here all day must get pretty dry." Sarah Chen's hand tightened on her radio. Protocol dictated that guards maintain their posts unless directly attacked, but the rules weren't written with former Navy SEALs in mind. She'd seen the subtle changes in Alex's stance. microscopic adjustments that turned his ceremonial position into a combat-ready stance. Ghost stepped closer, now well within striking distance. "You know what we did before coming here?" His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for Alex. "We visited the military cemetery, saw all those graves, all those forgotten heroes." His eyes blazed with a dangerous mix of grief and rage. "And here you are, pretending to be something you're not, dishonoring their memory." The irony of his words wasn't lost on Alex. Every movement drill, every hour standing guard was his way of honoring fallen comrades. The discipline he showed wasn't an act. It was a continuation of the same dedication that had driven him through SEAL training. Captain Harrison's voice came through Sarah's earpiece. "Response team is 2 minutes out. Try to contain the situation." He paused, then added, "And Chen? Be ready for anything. Drake's file. Just be ready." Scarface raised the bottle, making a show of taking aim at Alex's uniform. The morning sun caught the liquid inside, making it gleam like amber. Tourist cameras clicked rapidly, their owners both horrified and transfixed by the unfolding drama. "Last chance, Tin Soldier," Ghost announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Show us you're actually human. Show us there's still a man under all that royal bullshit." He reached into his vest, producing something that made Sarah Chen's breath catch. A small medallion on a chain, the kind given to families of fallen soldiers. "My brother earned this," Ghost's voice shook with emotion. "Earned it dying in some godforsaken desert while people like you play pretend at being soldiers." He dangled the medallion in front of Alex's face. "What do you say to that, puppet? What do you say to his sacrifice?" The tension in the courtyard reached breaking point. Bomber and Wasp had completed their flanking movement. Scarface held the bottle ready. Hook watched the perimeter with professional efficiency. And Ghost stood toe-to-toe with Alex, grief and rage radiating from him in almost visible waves. Unknown to the bikers, Alex's mind was racing through combat scenarios with SEAL team precision. He noted every position, every potential weapon, every escape route. But more importantly, he recognized the pain driving Ghost's actions. The man wasn't just a common troublemaker. He was a wounded veteran lashing out at what he saw as a mockery of military service. The next few seconds would determine whether this confrontation ended in violence or something else entirely. And as the sun climbed higher over Windsor Castle's ancient walls, both a Royal Guard's discipline and a Navy SEAL's training were about to be put to the ultimate test. Time seemed to slow as Alex Drake stood at his post, every muscle tense beneath his ceremonial uniform. His mind flashed back to his SEAL training instructor's words. "The hardest battles aren't fought with your fists, they're fought with your conscience." Now, facing Ghost's grief-fueled rage, those words rang truer than ever. Sarah Chen's voice crackled again over the radio, updating security on the situation. But Alex barely registered it. His focus had narrowed to the medallion swaying in front of his face, a powerful symbol of sacrifice that Ghost was wielding like a weapon. Through his peripheral vision, he could see Scarface adjusting his grip on the bottle, ready to douse him with alcohol. Captain Harrison's voice came through the security channel. "Response team delayed by tourist crowd at main gate. Maintain position." The message wasn't meant for Alex, but it filtered through the tension-filled air. 3 minutes, maybe 4, before backup arrived. An eternity in a situation like this. Images flashed through Alex's mind. His own fallen comrades, missions that ended in flag-draped coffins, the weight of decisions that cost lives. He understood Ghost's pain better than the biker could know. But he'd chosen a different path to honor that sacrifice, standing guard over the traditions and institutions that his brothers had died protecting. Thomas Burke, the young tour guide, had managed to create some distance between the crowd and the confrontation, but he couldn't evacuate the area entirely. Tourists pressed against the barriers, phones recording every moment. Whatever happened next would be witnessed by hundreds, maybe millions, once the videos spread online. Ghost's fingers tightened around the medallion. "My brother Tommy," his voice cracked slightly. "He believed in all this. Queen and country, Duty and honor. Look where it got him. The biker's grief was raw, real, cutting through his tough exterior like a blade. Alex's training screamed at him to act. He could disarm all 5 men in under 30 seconds. The moves played out in his mind with tactical precision. Take Ghost's wrist. Use his momentum against him. Sweep Scarface's legs before he could throw the alcohol. Disable Bomber and Wasp with quick strikes to pressure points. But that would mean breaking position, violating his duty as a Queen's Guard. Sarah Chen watched the scene unfold, her own military experience telling her what few others could see. The subtle signs of a highly trained operator weighing options. She'd served 2 tours in Iraq before joining the Palace Guard. She knew the look of someone running combat calculations behind a mask of calm. You're no different from the ones who sent him to die, Ghost continued, his voice rising. Standing there all proper and disciplined, while real soldiers bleed in the dirt. He was shouting now, his pain echoing off the ancient stones. At least look at me when I'm talking to you. Alex felt the weight of his own service medallion beneath his uniform, pressed against his chest. He thought about the men he'd served with in the SEALs, the missions that never made the headlines, the sacrifices that remained classified. Ghost wasn't entirely wrong. There was often a gulf between ceremonial honor and the brutal reality of combat. Captain Harrison's voice came through again. Be advised. Subjects identified as members of Steel Viper's militant faction. Ghost, real name James Morrison, former Royal Marines. Lost brother in Afghanistan, 2019. Approach with extreme caution. The information clicked into place in Alex's mind. He remembered reading about that operation, a convoy ambush that killed 3 Royal Marines. He'd been in country then, running parallel operations with his SEAL team. Different uniform, same war. Scarface raised the bottle higher, drawing Alex's attention back to the immediate threat. One splash of alcohol, one spark, and this could turn deadly. But the bigger danger was Ghost himself, a wounded warrior whose pain had curdled into something violent and unpredictable. The morning sun now blazed fully over the castle walls, making Alex's scarlet uniform glow like flame. Sweat trickled down his back beneath the thick wool, but he remained motionless. Years of SEAL training had taught him that sometimes the hardest thing was to not act, to wait for the right moment, even when every instinct screamed for immediate action. Sarah Chen's fingers hovered over her radio, ready to call for immediate intervention. She saw what others might miss. The way Alex's weight had shifted slightly forward, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders. The man wasn't frozen by fear or protocol. He was a weapon waiting to be unleashed. Ghost thrust the medallion closer, its metal surface catching the sunlight. You want to know what real service looks like? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. It looks like this. Blood and death and families torn apart. Not playing statue for tourists. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Alex. Here he was, a highly trained combat veteran being accused of not understanding sacrifice, while maintaining his discipline was perhaps the greatest test of his training yet. Every heartbeat brought the situation closer to its breaking point, and he knew that whatever choice he made would have lasting consequences. Everything happened in an instant. Scarface's arm drew back with the bottle just as Ghost's grief-twisted face contorted with rage. "Show some respect," the biker leader roared, his hand shooting forward to grab Alex's uniform. In that split second, Alex made his decision. 6 years of SEAL training took over. Alex's right hand shot up, catching Ghost's wrist in a lightning-fast grip before it could touch his uniform. The movement was so swift, so precise, that tourists watching through their phone cameras would later have to slow down the footage to see exactly what happened. "You wanted my attention," Alex spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a combat veteran. "Now you have it." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Ghost's eyes widened in shock, both at the guard's sudden movement and the iron grip on his wrist. Behind Alex, Scarface's forward momentum with the bottle was already in motion. But Alex had anticipated this. SEAL operators were trained to handle multiple threats simultaneously. In one fluid motion, Alex pivoted, using Ghost's trapped arm as a lever to spin the larger man into Scarface's path. The bottle of alcohol went flying, its contents splashing harmlessly against the cobblestones. Ghost collided with his companion, sending both men staggering. "Contact made." Sarah Chen's voice cut through the chaos, alerting security. Guard Drake engaged with hostile subjects. But Alex was already moving, his ceremonial uniform doing nothing to hamper the lethal grace of his movements. Bomber and Wasp rushed in from their flanking positions, but Alex had been tracking their locations since they'd first arrived. He sidestepped Bomber's wild punch, redirecting the man's momentum into Wasp's charge. The two bikers crashed into each other with a heavy thud. "Stand down!" Alex's command voice boomed across the courtyard, the same tone he'd used leading operations in combat zones. "I won't tell you twice." His stance had shifted from ceremonial guard to combat operator, each movement economical and precise. Ghost recovered his balance, rage and confusion warring on his face. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, nursing his wrist where Alex's grip had left marks. "Someone who understands loss better than you think," Alex replied, maintaining his defensive position as the bikers regrouped. "And someone who won't let you dishonor your brother's sacrifice with this behavior." Hook abandoned his position by the motorcycles, moving to support his companions. But Alex's situational awareness hadn't wavered. He'd been monitoring the fifth biker's position throughout the confrontation. "Stay where you are," Alex warned, not even turning to look at Hook. "Your prosthetic telegraphs your movements. I heard you coming 10 steps ago." The professional assessment stopped Hook in his tracks. This was no ordinary palace guard. The tactical awareness, the combat expertise, it all spoke of serious special operations training. Tourist cameras kept rolling as Captain Harrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Response team 30 seconds out. Situation contained?" Sarah Chen's reply was tinged with awe. "You need to see this for yourself, sir." Ghost's rage seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by growing recognition. "You're one of us," he said slowly. "Special operations?" His military background was helping him read the signs other civilians might miss. The economy of movement, the tactical positioning, the complete awareness of the battlefield. "Navy SEAL," Alex confirmed, his voice softening slightly. 6 years, 3 combat deployments. I was in Afghanistan when your brother's convoy was hit." The revelation landed like a physical blow, causing Ghost to take a step back. Scarface and the others looked uncertainly at their leader, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of Alex's revealed identity. They'd come looking to harass what they thought was a ceremonial guard, only to find themselves facing a highly trained operator. "Your brother Tommy," Alex continued, maintaining his defensive stance but keeping his voice level. "He wasn't just following orders that day. The convoy diverted to protect a civilian settlement. He died saving others. That's what that medallion really represents." Ghost's hand instinctively went to the medallion still clutched in his fist. "How do you know that?" His voice cracked. "That detail wasn't in the official report." "Because my team was running parallel ops in the area," Alex explained. "We got the distress call, but we were too far out to respond in time. I read every detail of that report, trying to figure out if we could have done something different." The palace response team arrived at that moment, armed officers taking up positions around the courtyard. But Alex raised his hand, signaling them to hold position. This situation needed resolution, not escalation. "Your brother understood what this uniform represents," Alex said, gesturing to his ceremonial dress. "It's not about playing soldier. It's about honoring every sacrifice made in service to others, including Tommy's." The fight seemed to drain out of Ghost completely. His companions backed away, recognizing that the confrontation was over. In its place, an odd sort of understanding began to form between two warriors who had chosen different paths to deal with their combat experiences. The palace response team maintained their positions, weapons lowered but ready, as Captain Harrison strode into the courtyard. The morning sun caught the polished insignia on his uniform as he surveyed the scene. 5 subdued bikers, a crowd of awestruck tourists still filming, and Alex Drake standing at parade rest, his ceremonial uniform barely wrinkled despite the recent action. "Quite a show, Drake," Harrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "My office. Now." He turned to the response team. Escort our visitors to the security station for processing. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Ghost looked at his medallion, then back at Alex. Wait, he called out, his voice lacking its earlier aggression. I need to know something. Harrison paused, assessing the situation. After a moment, he nodded for Ghost to continue. You said you were there in that region? Ghost's voice was rough with emotion. Did Tommy say anything? At the end? The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unresolved grief. Alex met Ghost's eyes. He called for air support to protect the civilian settlement. His last words were coordinates. He was more concerned about their safety than his own. He paused, then added softly, That's what real service looks like. Ghost's tough exterior cracked completely. His shoulders sagged as the response team moved to escort him and his companions away. I've been blaming the wrong people, he admitted, looking at his steel Viper's vest with sudden distaste. Dishonoring everything he stood for. Sarah Chen approached, her radio quiet now that the situation was contained. Sir, she addressed Harrison. The footage from the security cameras. She glanced at Alex. It's already being reviewed by Palace administration. Harrison's expression tightened. Of course it is. He turned to the gathering crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, the area needs to be cleared. Mr. Burke, please assist with redirecting the tours. Thomas Burke, who had watched the entire confrontation with a mixture of fear and amazement, began herding tourists toward alternate routes. Many were still trying to capture final photos of Alex, their excited chatter filled with phrases like Navy SEAL and "Did you see how fast he moved?" The public relations office is already getting calls, Harrison informed Alex as they walked toward the security building. Videos are hitting social media. This isn't going to stay quiet. His tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, despite the breach in protocol. Inside Harrison's office, the captain settled behind his desk while Alex stood at attention. Through the window, they could see the response team escorting the bikers to the security station. Ghost walked with his head down, the medallion now tucked safely in his pocket. Explain your decision to engage, Harrison ordered, though his voice lacked the stern edge one might expect. He'd reviewed Alex's heavily redacted service record. He knew he wasn't dealing with an ordinary guard. They were escalating toward violence, sir, Alex reported. The alcohol presented an immediate threat to safety. Given Ghost's military background and emotional state, de-escalation through conventional means wasn't viable. Harrison nodded slowly. And the decision to reveal your SEAL background? The question was pointed. Special operations backgrounds weren't typically advertised. Tactical choice, sir, Alex replied. Ghost needed to understand he wasn't just confronting a uniform, but someone who understood his loss. It was the fastest way to achieve psychological de-escalation. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered with a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. She handed the device to Harrison, who scrolled through what appeared to be social media responses. Well, Harrison sighed, it seems the public has its own opinion about today's events. He turned the tablet to show Alex. The videos of the confrontation were trending, with comments overwhelmingly supportive of the guard's actions. Many praised the perfect balance of skill and restraint, while others shared stories about military loss and the importance of remembering real sacrifice. The palace will need to make a statement, Harrison continued. This has gone beyond a simple security incident. He studied Alex thoughtfully, though perhaps not in a bad way. Your actions demonstrated both the discipline we expect and the capability to handle genuine threats. Sarah Chen cleared her throat. Sir, Ghost, Mr. Morrison, is asking to make a formal apology. He seems different. The encounter appears to have affected him deeply. Harrison raised an eyebrow at Alex. Your call, Drake. You're the injured party here. Alex considered for a moment. I'll speak with him, sir. He's not the first veteran to struggle with loss. Sometimes what looks like disrespect is really just pain looking for an outlet. Very well, Harrison nodded. But first we need to discuss your position here. Breaking formation is normally a serious offense. He let the sentence hang. I understand, sir. Alex stood straighter, prepared to accept whatever consequences came. However, Harrison continued, your handling of the situation likely prevented a much worse incident. The palace guard could benefit from more men with your particular skill set. A slight smile crossed his face. How do you feel about training other guards in advanced threat assessment and response? Before Alex could respond, Sarah Chen interrupted again. Sir, the palace administration is on the line. They want to discuss implementing new security protocols based on today's incident. The morning's events had sparked changes that would ripple through the entire palace guard system. What had started as a confrontation was transforming into an opportunity to bridge the gap between ceremonial tradition and modern security needs. Later that afternoon, Alex found himself in the palace's security conference room, facing James "Ghost" Morrison across a polished oak table. The biker's leather vest was gone, replaced by a simple gray t-shirt that revealed faded military tattoos on his arms. The transformation from aggressive gang leader to grieving veteran was striking. I watched the security footage, Ghost said quietly, running his fingers over his brother's medallion. Saw how you moved. That wasn't just SEAL training. You've been in the real thing. Heavy combat. His eyes held a question. Alex nodded slowly. Kandahar, 2019. We were running counter-terror ops when your brother's convoy was hit. Different unit, same war. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The settlement he died protecting, they named their school after him, Tommy Morrison Primary School. It's still there. Ghost's head snapped up, eyes wide. They never told us that. The official report just said. His voice trailed off as emotion overtook him. Sarah Chen watched from near the door, impressed by Alex's approach. She'd dealt with countless volatile situations in her military career, but the way he connected with Ghost was something special. Warrior recognizing warrior across the divide of grief and anger. Your brother understood something I try to remember every day on duty, Alex continued. The uniform, any uniform, is about more than the person wearing it. It's about what we stand for. He gestured to the palace around them. When I stand guard here, I'm not just following protocol. I'm honoring every sacrifice made in service to something greater than ourselves. Captain Harrison entered quietly, carrying a folder. He'd spent the last hour in video conferences with palace administration, dealing with the viral spread of the incident footage. Mr. Morrison, he addressed Ghost, we've reviewed your record. Distinguished service with the Royal Marines, multiple commendations before your brother's death. Ghost's shoulders tensed. That was a lifetime ago. Perhaps, Harrison replied. But that man isn't gone. The same one who earned these commendations. He opened the folder, revealing Ghost's military record. The same one who, according to this, once held off insurgents for 6 hours to protect wounded civilians. Thomas Burke, who had been asked to attend as a witness, watched the exchange with fascination. The young tour guide had never seen this side of military service, the brotherhood that transcended uniforms and time, the shared understanding of sacrifice. The Steel Vipers, Ghost spoke suddenly. They took me in when I was at my lowest. After Tommy, I couldn't handle the sympathy, the formal ceremonies. They understood anger, made it feel righteous. He looked down at his hands. But today, seeing how you handled us, how you spoke about Tommy, it made me realize how far I've strayed from everything he believed in. Alex leaned forward. It's not too late to honor his memory differently. His voice carried the weight of experience. The Palace Guard isn't just about ceremony. We protect people, preserve traditions that remind everyone why sacrifice matters. Your experience, your understanding of loss, it could make a difference here. Sarah Chen stepped forward. Sir, she addressed Harrison, the new training program you mentioned about integrating combat veterans into palace security. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Morrison, your record suggests someone who once understood duty deeply. Recent choices aside, those instincts don't disappear. He paused, measuring his next words. We're developing a program to help veterans transition into palace security roles. People who understand both ceremony and combat. Would you be interested? Ghost stared at him in disbelief. After what I did today? You'd trust me? Trust is earned, Alex interjected. But understanding comes first. You came here angry because you thought we were mocking real service. Let us show you how we honor it instead. Thomas Burke couldn't contain himself. The tourists always ask about the guards' backgrounds, he added. Imagine being able to tell them about real veterans protecting these halls, about brothers in arms carrying on their service in a new way. Ghost's fingers traced the medallion one last time before he tucked it away. Tommy would have loved this place, he said softly. All this history, tradition. He used to read about it even in the field. His voice strengthened. Maybe I could see it through his eyes now. Harrison smiled slightly. We'll need to discuss terms, requirements. There would be conditions given today's events. He glanced at Alex. But having Guard Drake involved in training could help bridge the gap between combat experience and ceremonial duty. Sarah Chen's radio crackled with routine security updates, a reminder that beyond this room, the palace's daily operations continued. Yet something profound had shifted. What began as a confrontation was transforming into an opportunity for healing, for redirecting a warrior's pain into purposeful service. The Steel Vipers, Ghost said firmly. I'm done with them. They offered brotherhood, but it was just shared anger. He gestured to the palace around them. This is real brotherhood. What Tommy died protecting. Alex stood, extending his hand across the table. Then let's honor him properly, not with anger, but with service. Ghost stood as well, grasping Alex's hand in a warrior's grip. The transformation wasn't complete, but the path forward was clear. The peace of the morning shattered with the roar of motorcycle engines. 3 days after the initial confrontation, a dozen Steel Vipers motorcycles rolled to a stop outside the palace gates. Alex Drake, back at his post, immediately recognized the patches on their jackets. These weren't Ghost's usual crew, but higher-ranking members from other chapters. Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Multiple subjects approaching North Gate, Steel Vipers colors identified. Her tone was professional, but tense. Previous incident participants among them. Through the security cameras, Captain Harrison watched Scarface and Hook dismount their bikes alongside unfamiliar faces. The new arrivals carried themselves with the dangerous confidence of men used to intimidation. One, a massive figure with sergeant's stripes tattooed on his neck, was clearly in charge. That's Marcus the Major Wilson, Ghost's voice came through Harrison's earpiece. He was watching from the security office, part of his provisional acceptance into the palace security program. Former Royal Artillery, dishonorably discharged. He's the one who recruited me after Tommy died. The Major strode toward the gate, ignoring the warning signs. Tourists scattered, sensing the tension in the air. Thomas Burke quickly began directing visitors away from the area, his previous experience helping him recognize the signs of impending trouble. James Morrison! The Major's voice boomed across the courtyard. We know you're in there, brother. Time to stop playing palace guard and remember where your loyalties lie. The threat in his voice was clear. Alex maintained his ceremonial stance, but his mind was already gaming out scenarios. The Steel Vipers weren't just here to intimidate. This was about Ghost's defection, about maintaining their power through fear. Standard gang psychology, but with a military edge that made them more dangerous. Sir, Sarah Chen addressed Harrison through the radio. Ghost's integration into security is still classified. They shouldn't know he's here. The implication was clear. They had an information leak. Harrison's response was immediate. Chen, activate Protocol Delta. Drake, maintain position but be ready. They're testing our responses. Behind the scenes, palace security teams began moving into predetermined positions. The Major approached Alex's post, studying him with cold calculation. So you're the SEAL who thinks he can poach our brothers. His voice carried the crisp accent of British military command, twisted by years of bitterness. Impressive moves in those videos, but this isn't about combat skills. It's about loyalty. Alex remained motionless, but his senses were razor sharp. He tracked the major's movements, noting the subtle signs of military training gone wrong. The man's stance, his tactical awareness. He wasn't just a gang leader. He was a corrupted soldier using his training for intimidation. Your little recruitment drive ends now, the major continued, pacing like a predator. Ghost belongs with us. We understood his pain when the military abandoned him. Where were you fancy guards when he was drowning in grief? In the security office, Ghost watched the feeds intently. He's working up to something, he warned. The major never makes direct moves. He's creating a distraction. As if on cue, security cameras caught movement at the east gate. 3 more Steel Vipers had split from the group, taking positions that suggested a coordinated plan. They were probing the palace's security response, using military tactics. They're not just here for Ghost. Alex's quiet voice came through the radio, breaking protocol but necessary. This is a power play. If they can intimidate the palace guard, it boosts their reputation, makes recruitment easier. Harrison nodded grimly. Agreed. Chen, alert Metropolitan Police. We may need support if this escalates. He turned to Ghost. Your insight could be valuable here. How would the major typically proceed? Ghost studied the screens. He's putting on a show, but the real move will come from an unexpected direction. In the Marines, he specialized in... Ghost's eyes widened. Check the visitor logs from the past week, now. Quick research confirmed Ghost's suspicion. Several Steel Vipers prospects had taken palace tours over the past few days, likely gathering intelligence. This confrontation wasn't spontaneous. It was a calculated operation using military precision against ceremonial targets. The major's voice rose again, now playing to the gathering crowd. Look at him, standing there like a statue while we do whatever we want. Is this what you left us for, Ghost? Trading real brotherhood for fancy dress parades? In the security office, Ghost's hands clenched into fists. He's trying to bait a response, prove that the palace guard is all show. If Alex breaks position, they win. If he doesn't, they'll escalate until something breaks. Harrison faced a command decision. Protocol said to maintain ceremony until directly threatened, but he was dealing with military-trained adversaries who knew how to exploit those rules. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Through it all, Alex stood unwavering, his mind processing multiple scenarios. The major's psychological warfare was sophisticated, using public space, ceremonial constraints, and military knowledge against them. But Alex had his own experience with unconventional warfare, and he knew sometimes the best defense was letting your opponent think they had the upper hand. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the tension. Sir, Metropolitan Police are 8 minutes out, but the major's body language suggests we don't have that long. The morning sun caught the major's Sergeant Stripes tattoo as he moved closer to Alex's position. Last chance, Ghost, he called out, knowing his former brother was watching. Remember what we talked about in Kandahar? About how ceremony and protocol are just chains used to control real warriors? In that moment, the true complexity of their situation became clear. This wasn't just about Ghost's defection or gang intimidation. It was about the eternal struggle between discipline and chaos, between honoring service and corrupting it. And Alex Drake, standing motionless at his post, was the living symbol of that battle. The confrontation at the palace gates had drawn an unprecedented crowd. Tourists, locals, and even journalists gathered at a safe distance, their phones and cameras documenting every moment. The videos of Alex's previous encounter with Ghost had gone viral, and now social media was buzzing with live updates of this new development. Sir, Thomas Burke approached Captain Harrison in the security office, tablet in hand. The story's trending nationwide. Veterans groups are speaking out, taking sides. He showed Harrison the screen, where heated debates raged across various platforms. Some praised the Palace Guard's discipline and integration of combat veterans, while others sympathized with the Steel Viper's message about abandoned warriors. The incident had touched a nerve, exposing deeper tensions about how society treated its returning soldiers. "We're getting calls from military support organizations," Sarah Chen reported, monitoring communications. "They want to help Ghost and other veterans leave militant groups, use this as a template for rehabilitation through service." The Major seemed aware of his growing audience, playing to the cameras with theatrical precision. "You all think you're watching some noble tradition," he called out, voice carrying across the courtyard. "But we're the ones who fought and bled while they paraded around in fancy dress." In the security office, Ghost watched the Major's performance with growing concern. "He's rallying support," he warned. "Other disillusioned veterans will see this, think he's speaking for them. That's how he recruited me. Turned my grief into a weapon." Harrison nodded grimly. "And now we're seeing the larger pattern. This isn't just about you or the Steel Vipers anymore. It's becoming a symbol for something bigger." He turned to his team. "We need to contain this before it sparks copycat incidents at other ceremonial posts." Outside, the Major's lieutenants had started engaging with the crowd, spreading their message of betrayed warriors and empty ceremonies. Some tourists began to look uncertainly at Alex, their earlier admiration tainted by seeds of doubt. "Look at their fancy uniforms," one Steel Viper called out. "While we were fighting in the dirt, they were practicing their marching." The words were calculated to create division, to paint ceremonial guards as lesser soldiers. But then something unexpected happened. An elderly man in a Veterans Association jacket stepped forward from the crowd. "My grandson served with the guards in Afghanistan," he announced clearly. "They're not just ceremonial. They're soldiers who choose to honor tradition while still being ready to fight." Others began to speak up. A woman whose brother had been helped by a veteran rehabilitation program, a former soldier who had found purpose in ceremonial duties. The narrative was shifting, the crowd no longer just spectators but participants in a larger debate about service and honor. Sarah Chen's radio crackled with updates from police units approaching the scene. But more importantly, veterans organizations were mobilizing, sending representatives to support Ghost's choice and counter the Major's message. In the security office, Ghost watched the situation unfold with growing understanding. "This is bigger than me now," he said quietly. "The Major's not just losing a member, he's losing control of the narrative. The Steel Vipers promised angry veterans a way to matter again, but now they're seeing another path." Harrison studied the security feeds thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with force," he observed. "They're won by showing people a better way." He turned to Ghost. "Your choice to change sides, to honor your brother's memory through legitimate service. It's resonating with others." Alex maintained his post through it all, his stillness now a powerful counterpoint to the Major's theatrical display. His discipline spoke louder than words, demonstrating that ceremony and combat strength could coexist. Thomas Burke, still monitoring social media, reported a new development. "Sir, military forums are lighting up. Former Steel Vipers members are coming forward, sharing stories about wanting to leave but fearing retaliation. They're saying Ghost's example gives them hope." The Major must have sensed the shifting momentum. His next words carried an edge of desperation. "You think standing pretty at a palace makes you a better soldier?" he challenged. "We've got chapters across the country, brothers, who understand that real warriors don't play dress-up." But his threats were losing impact. The crowd had witnessed something powerful, not just the physical discipline of the palace guard, but the moral courage to choose a better path. Ghost's transformation from angry veteran to proud servant of tradition was becoming a symbol of redemption. Sarah Chen approached Harrison with new information. "Sir, veteran support networks are offering to help establish a formal program, using the Palace Guard as a model for integrating combat veterans into ceremonial roles, giving them a way to serve with honor." The story was evolving beyond a simple confrontation. It was becoming a conversation about how society honored its warriors, about the different ways soldiers could continue serving with dignity. The palace itself was transforming from a ceremonial target into a symbol of positive change. "The Major doesn't realize it," Ghost commented, watching his former leader's increasingly frustrated display. "But he's helping us prove exactly why this program matters. Every veteran watching this has to choose anger or honor, destruction or dedication." Harrison nodded, seeing the bigger picture emerge. What had started as a personal confrontation was catalyzing a movement. Sometimes, he mused, the best way to defeat an enemy is to show their followers a better path. The Major's composure finally cracked. Seeing his message falter, his authority challenged, he made the decisive move Ghost had warned about. With military precision, he gave a subtle hand signal, one Alex instantly recognized from combat operations. Multiple suspects moving. Sarachen's voice cut through the radio channels as 3 steel vipers broke from their positions, rushing toward the palace gates. They weren't just making a show anymore. This was a coordinated breach attempt. Alex remained motionless, but his combat-trained senses tracked every movement. The Major's plan became clear. Force a response, prove the ceremonial guard was just for show. It was the kind of tactical thinking that made disillusioned veterans so dangerous. Ghost? Harrison's voice was tense in the security office. What's their play? He watched as more bikers began revving their engines, creating a wall of noise and chaos. Standard insurgent tactic, Ghost replied, recognizing his former leader's strategy. Create multiple threats, divide the response. The Major's using his Royal Artillery training. He's treating this like a military operation. The first wave of bikers reached the restricted zone, deliberately crossing the barriers. The Major's voice rose above the engine noise. Show everyone what these toy soldiers really are. Let them break ranks or look weak. Alex's mind raced through combat scenarios. The Major was executing a perfect pressure play. Either the palace guard would break ceremony and prove his point about empty traditions, or maintain position and appear powerless. But there was a third option, one that only a SEAL would see. In the security office, Ghost suddenly straightened. He's not just testing Alex, he realized. He's testing me, proving I chose the wrong side. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed a radio and headed for the door. Captain, I need to be out there. Harrison started to object, but Ghost cut him off. The Major's whole message is about abandoned warriors. Let me show them what choosing honor really means. After a moment's consideration, Harrison nodded. Outside, the situation was escalating. More steel vipers had crossed the barriers, their tactical spacing showing clear military training. Tourists pressed against the safety cordons, phones recording every moment. The Major stood in the center of it all, orchestrating chaos with veteran precision. Last chance, Ghost, he shouted, knowing his words were being broadcast across social media. Show these ceremony lovers what real soldiers do when threatened. That's when Ghost emerged from the palace gates. He walked slowly, deliberately, his steel viper's vest replaced by a palace security uniform. The crowd fell silent, cameras swiveling to capture this unexpected development. I see them, Ghost's voice carried clearly across the courtyard. I see real soldiers. He gestured to Alex, still motionless at his post. Men who understand that discipline isn't weakness, that ceremony doesn't erase combat strength. The Major's face contorted with rage. You're choosing them over your brothers? Over everything we built? His control was slipping, the calculated military commander giving way to personal betrayal. I'm choosing what Tommy died for, Ghost replied, his voice steady. He gave his life protecting tradition, protecting a way of life. These guards? They do the same thing every day, standing ready while honoring sacrifice. Alex remained at attention, but his presence had transformed. Now his stillness wasn't just ceremony, it was a warrior's poise, combat readiness wrapped in tradition. The watching crowd began to understand what they were seeing. Not just a guard, but a sentinel combining ceremony with deadly capability. The Major made his final move. He rushed forward, military training evident in his movement, directly toward Alex's position. Then let's see how your fancy guard handles a real threat. What happened next became instant viral footage. Alex's response was so smooth, so precise, that it seemed to flow from his ceremonial stance like water. One moment he was at attention, the next, the Major was on his knees, arm locked in a perfect joint manipulation that any combat veteran would recognize. You forgot the first rule of special operations. Alex spoke for the first time, voice calm. Never assume your target hasn't already planned for your attack. Around them, palace security teams emerged from concealed positions, covering the other Steel Vipers with practiced efficiency. Ghost approached his former leader, now secured by Alex's hold. The Major. Wilson, you taught me that ceremony was a chain, but you were wrong. It's not about being chained. It's about choosing to stand for something greater than ourselves. The watching crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Phones captured the moment as more Steel Vipers members, seeing their leader subdued, began backing away from the barriers. The Major's carefully orchestrated challenge had backfired, becoming instead a powerful demonstration of how ceremony and combat strength could coexist. Sarah Chen's voice came through the radio. Metropolitan Police have arrived. Military veteran liaison units are with them. She paused, then added, "Sir, the footage is already trending. They're calling it the Guard Stand." Harrison watched from the security office as Ghost helped coordinate the police response, his inside knowledge of the Steel Vipers proving invaluable. The former biker had found his new purpose, bridging the gap between combat veterans and ceremonial service. Alex resumed his post as the Major was led away, his return to position as smooth as his defensive action had been. The watching crowd understood they had witnessed something profound, not just a confrontation but a moment of transformation where ceremony and combat prowess proved they could serve the same noble purpose. The following days saw Windsor Castle transformed. News vans lined the streets as journalists covered what was being called the Guard's Stand. But more importantly, veterans began arriving, not to challenge the Guard, but to learn about the new integration program Ghost and Harrison were developing. In the palace's main conference room, Ghost sat beside Alex, both in formal palace security uniforms, addressing a group of former Steel Vipers members. The gang patches on their vests couldn't hide their military bearing, or their obvious interest in what their former brother had to say. "The Major had it backwards," Ghost explained, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "He thought ceremony made us weak, that tradition was a chain, but standing here protecting these walls, it's not about being restricted, it's about choosing to uphold something greater than ourselves." Alex watched the veterans' reactions, noting the subtle signs of recognition in their eyes. These were men who understood discipline, who had once stood for something greater. They'd lost their way, just as Ghost had, but that core of service remained. "When I first came here," Ghost continued, gesturing to Alex, "I thought I was facing an enemy. Instead, I found a brother in arms who showed me how to honor Tommy's sacrifice properly." He touched the medal now properly displayed on his new uniform. "My brother died protecting tradition. Now I get to do the same thing every day." Sarah Chen entered the room quietly, handing Harrison a tablet with the latest social media updates. The footage of Alex's response to the Major had gone viral, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Combat veterans were analyzing and praising the perfect blend of ceremonial discipline and tactical expertise. "The program's already receiving official support," Harrison announced, scanning the tablet. "Military rehabilitation centers want to use it as a model. They're calling it Guardians of Tradition, a way for combat veterans to continue serving while honoring ceremonial duties." Outside, Thomas Burke led a tour group past Alex's post, his commentary now including a new element. "The Queen's Guard represents the perfect balance of ceremony and capability," he explained to the attentive tourists. "These aren't just ceremonial positions. They're held by real soldiers who choose to honor tradition while maintaining their readiness to protect." The Steel Vipers who had witnessed the Major's takedown were now in custody, but their stories were spreading through veteran communities. They spoke of how Alex's response had been pure military precision, how Ghost's transformation showed another path was possible. The gang's recruitment of disillusioned veterans was already dropping. In the security office, Ghost and Alex reviewed applications from other veterans interested in the program. "They need to understand," Ghost emphasized, "this isn't about giving up combat skills. It's about channeling them into something meaningful." Alex nodded, remembering his own journey from SEAL operations to Palace Guard. "It's about showing that discipline isn't weakness," he added. "That choosing to stand for tradition takes as much strength as any combat mission." Sarah Chen brought more news. Veterans support groups were organizing visits to the palace, bringing former soldiers to see the guard changes in a new light. The ceremonies were no longer viewed as mere tourist attractions, but as demonstrations of military precision and honor. The Major made one thing clear, Harrison observed, watching the security feeds of tourists respectfully observing the guards. We needed to bridge the gap between ceremonial duty and combat experience. He just didn't realize he was helping us build that bridge. Ghost touched his brother's medal again, a gesture that had transformed from one of grief to one of pride. Tommy would have understood this, he said quietly. He always said that being a soldier wasn't just about fighting. It was about standing for something. The palace grounds had become more than a tourist destination. They were now a symbol of redemption and renewed purpose. Veterans who had felt lost after service were finding a new way to serve, a path that honored both their combat experience and their need for continued meaning. Alex resumed his post each day with a deeper sense of purpose. Tourists still took photos, but now they watched with understanding, particularly the veterans among them who recognized the military precision in his ceremonial stance. His position was no longer just a guard post, it was a bridge between two worlds. The Major, facing charges for the attempted breach, had inadvertently sparked a movement. His attempt to discredit the palace guard had instead revealed its true strength, the ability to combine ceremony with combat readiness, tradition with tactical expertise. We're receiving inquiries from other ceremonial units worldwide, Harrison announced during a staff briefing. They want to implement similar veteran integration programs. What happened here is becoming a template for change. Ghost, standing at attention in his new uniform, felt the weight of his brother's medal against his chest. Tommy died protecting what these walls represent, he said. Now we get to show others how to do the same thing, with honor instead of anger. The achievement wasn't just in stopping the Major's challenge or transforming the Steel Viper's influence. It was in showing that ceremony and combat strength weren't opposing forces. They were complementary aspects of true service. The Palace Guard had become a living example of how to honor both tradition and tactical excellence. 1 week after the Guard's stand, Windsor Castle's grand ceremonial hall was filled to capacity. Military officers, palace officials, veterans, and media representatives gathered for what was being called a celebration of service. The morning sun streamed through ancient stained glass windows, casting colored light across the assembled crowd. Captain Harrison stood at the podium, his formal uniform gleaming under the chandeliers. Today we recognize not just individual acts of courage, he began, but a moment of transformation in how we honor military service. His eyes swept the crowd, noting the mix of ceremonial uniforms and veterans' medals. Alex Drake stood at attention in the front row, his guard uniform immaculate. Beside him, Ghost, now officially James Morrison again, wore his new palace security uniform, his brother's medal properly mounted alongside his own service decorations. Sarah Chen and Thomas Burke sat nearby, representatives of the different aspects of palace service that had come together during the crisis. What we witnessed last week, Harrison continued, was more than a confrontation. It was a demonstration of how ceremonial duty and combat capability can serve the same noble purpose. He gestured to Alex. Guard Drake, step forward. Alex approached the podium with measured steps, every movement displaying the discipline that had turned a viral moment into a movement for change. The assembled crowd watched with new understanding. This wasn't just ceremony. It was precision born of both palace training and combat experience. Your actions demonstrated the perfect balance of ceremonial respect and tactical necessity, Harrison announced. But more importantly, you showed that choosing to uphold tradition requires as much strength as any battlefield courage. He lifted a velvet box from the podium. It is my honor to present you with the Palace Guardian's Cross, specially created to recognize those who defend both our physical security and our ceremonial heritage. The medal was unique, a traditional cross design incorporating modern tactical elements, symbolizing the bridge between ceremony and combat capability. As Harrison pinned it to Alex's uniform, Cameras flashed, capturing a moment that would inspire veterans worldwide. "James Morrison," Harrison called next. Ghost approached the podium, his posture reflecting his renewed sense of purpose. "Your journey from anger to understanding, from challenging tradition to upholding it, shows us the true meaning of continued service." Ghost stood tall as Harrison presented him with both a formal palace security badge and a new medal, the Veterans Redemption Cross. "This award," Harrison explained to the crowd, "will be given to those who help other veterans find their way back to honorable service." The ceremony continued as Harrison announced the official launch of the Guardians of Tradition program. Thanks to the events we witnessed, Palace Security will now actively recruit combat veterans, training them to uphold both ceremonial tradition and tactical readiness. Sarah Chen was recognized for her quick thinking during the crisis, and Thomas Burke for his role in helping transform public perception of the Guard's dual nature. But the most powerful moment came when Harrison asked Ghost to speak about his brother. Ghost approached the podium, touching Tommy's medal. "My brother died protecting tradition," he said, his voice strong with conviction. "I lost sight of that, let anger twist his sacrifice into something ugly. But standing here now wearing this uniform, I finally understand what he died for." He turned to face Alex. "This man didn't just stop me from making a terrible mistake. He showed me how to truly honor Tommy's memory. These ceremonies, these traditions, they're not chains. They're links to everything our brothers and sisters died protecting." The crowd's response was immediate and emotional. Veterans in attendance stood, offering silent salutes. Palace officials who had initially resisted the integration program now nodded in approval. The media captured everything, but even their cynical lenses couldn't diminish the authenticity of the moment. Harrison retook the podium to make a final announcement. As of today, the Palace Guard will incorporate a new element in its changing of the guard ceremony. Alongside our traditional display, we will include a moment of precision tactical movement, demonstrating that ceremony and combat readiness are two sides of the same coin. Alex and Ghost took their positions for this new ceremony, their movements a perfect blend of palace precision and military expertise. The assembled crowd watched in respectful silence as they demonstrated how tradition and tactical skill could work in harmony. "This is what the Major never understood," Ghost said afterward, as photographers captured images of him and Alex in their formal uniforms. "He thought we had to choose between being warriors and honoring tradition, but real strength is being able to do both." The ceremony concluded with the announcement of international interest in the program. Military units from across the globe were sending representatives to learn how to implement similar veteran integration initiatives. What had started as a confrontation at the palace gates was becoming a worldwide movement in how ceremonial units operated. As the crowd began to disperse, Alex resumed his guard post, this time with his new medal catching the sunlight. Tourists approached with greater respect now, veterans among them offering salutes that recognized both his ceremonial role and his combat background. Ghost took up his new security position, wearing his uniform with the same pride he'd once shown in his steel Viper's vest. But now that pride came from honoring sacrifice rather than nurturing anger, from protecting tradition rather than trying to tear it down. 6 months after the Guard's stand, Windsor Castle had evolved into something unprecedented. The morning sun still illuminated its ancient stones, tourists still gathered to watch the Guard changes, but there was a new understanding in the air. Every ceremony now carried deeper meaning, recognized not just as tradition, but as living proof of how military excellence could serve in times of peace. Alex Drake stood at his post, the Palace Guardian's cross gleaming on his scarlet uniform. Behind him, a new class of veteran recruits watched his stance, learning how to blend their combat training with ceremonial precision. The Guardians of Tradition program had expanded beyond all expectations, with former soldiers from various services finding renewed purpose in palace duties. "It's about the perfect balance," Ghost James Morrison explained to the recruits. Now a full-time instructor in the program, he wore his palace security uniform with the same pride he'd once shown in combat gear. Every movement, every ceremony, carries the weight of both tradition and tactical readiness. Sarah Chen, recently promoted to Chief of Palace Security Operations, monitored the training from her new office. The security feeds showed multiple veteran-integrated guard posts, each combining ceremonial duty with combat-trained awareness. What had started as one SEAL's stand against angry bikers had transformed into a revolutionary approach to ceremonial security. 3 more countries implementing similar programs, she reported to Captain Harrison during their morning briefing. The Australian War Memorial, Canada's Parliament Hill, even the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington. They're all adopting our veteran integration model. Harrison nodded, reviewing the latest statistics. Steel Viper's recruitment among veterans had dropped dramatically, while applications to ceremonial units soared. The Major's attempt to discredit the Palace Guard had instead sparked a global movement in how military experience could serve ceremony. Thomas Burke, now head of public relations for the Guard program, led specialized tours that explained the dual nature of palace security. Every guard you see, he told visitors, represents the perfect fusion of ceremonial honor and combat capability. They stand as living bridges between military service and ceremonial tradition. Outside the palace gates, a memorial had been erected, not just to fallen soldiers, but to the transformation their legacy inspired. Tommy Morrison's medal, donated by Ghost, held a place of honor alongside quotes about service and sacrifice. It had become a gathering point for veterans, a place to remember that honoring tradition was another form of protecting what their comrades died for. Your brother would be proud, Alex told Ghost during a quiet moment between ceremonies. They stood before the memorial, where fresh flowers appeared daily from veterans and tourists alike. He died protecting tradition. Now you're teaching others how to do the same. Ghost touched his brother's medal, now a gesture of pride rather than pain. Sometimes I wonder what the Major thinks, sitting in his cell, watching what his challenge created. He wanted to prove ceremony made us weak. Instead, he helped us show how it makes us stronger. The Steel Vipers had largely disbanded, their militant anti-ceremony message lost to a more powerful narrative of redemption through service. Former members now visited the palace regularly, not to challenge its guards, but to learn from them, to find their own path back to honorable service. Alex's viral moment of tactical response had become required viewing at military academies worldwide, studied not just for its physical execution, but for its demonstration of how discipline could serve both ceremony and combat readiness. Military units everywhere were rethinking their approach to ceremonial duties. It's never just been about standing still, Alex explained to a group of recruits, his voice carrying the authority of both SEAL experience and Guard service. It's about standing for something. Every moment at attention is a choice to honor those who gave everything for what these walls represent. The palace itself had been transformed. Security protocols now seamlessly integrated ceremonial tradition with tactical awareness. Tourists witnessed displays of precision that spoke to both military heritage and modern capability. The guards were no longer seen as mere attractions, but as symbols of how military excellence could adapt to serve in different ways. In the grand ceremonial hall, a new dedication summed up the program's impact. Here stand those who guard not just our traditions, but the very meaning of service. In their stance, ceremony and combat readiness become one. In their vigilance, sacrifice finds new purpose. As the sun set over Windsor Castle's ancient walls, Alex resumed his post with renewed purpose. Ghost took up his security position, scanning the crowds with professional awareness. Sarah Chen monitored her security feeds while Thomas Burke prepared for another specialized tour. Each played their part in something that had grown far beyond a single confrontation. The day's final guard change incorporated the new elements, precise ceremonial movements flowing seamlessly into tactical demonstrations. Tourists and veterans alike watched with understanding and respect, recognizing that true strength lay not in rejecting tradition, but in finding new ways to honor it. Ready for another day of standing still? Ghost asked Alex with a knowing smile, echoing the Major's old mockery but transforming it into something meaningful. Ready to stand for something, Alex replied, taking his post as the evening light caught his guardian's cross. Around them, Windsor Castle stood as it had for centuries, its traditions not weakened but strengthened by the integration of combat excellence with ceremonial grace. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.